Remember hyperinflation in Zimbabwe? The world watched in shock as prices rocketed and bigger notes simply couldn't be printed fast enough. Well, that subsided. So why this warning now? Economists Philip Haslam and Russell Lamberti have just released their book, When Money Destroys Nations. And they say it's not certain that other countries won't fall into the same abyss. Well, the authors join me now. Great to have you with us, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Philip. Right now, people are talking about the US and this Goldilocks economy where there's a little bit of inflation, but not too much. Europe facing deflation. So my first question is, are you smoking your socks?
No, we're not. That's the answer. America is currently printing money on a very large scale in response to a debt crisis that happened in 2008. It hasn't been enough to see runaway inflation, but all indicators are that more money printing will come from the country.
Russell, they've been doing this for years. So again, and we're seeing signs that the economy is picking up. Why will the future be different? Why will this happen when it hasn't so far?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that there has been a lot of inflation over the last few years. It's just manifested in different places than you would normally expect to find it. So very often we focus on the CPI index. That's been relatively subdued in the United States, but look at house prices, look at stock markets. London property prices are in a bubble. Stock prices across the globe are in a bubble. So the money that has been printed has certainly found its way into the asset markets. And I think that the longer that they continue with these policies, continue to print money, Japan is printing a whole lot of money. Europe is just announcing it's on the cusp of a big quantitative easing program. So I think what it's really telling us is that the quantum of money printing up till today hasn't really worked, and so they're continuing to try and print more to create this kind of growth that they're looking for, and that's a big concern. The longer that this persists, the greater the risk of a big inflation event in the future.
Let me stay with you. So in Zimbabwe, inflation went from 20% in 1997 to an unpronounceable number in 2008.
Yeah.
Can you pronounce that number? And you know, so how does that picture compare with this vision you have of what could happen?
Well, look, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that what we saw in Zimbabwe is truly the extreme of economic crisis and of currency crisis. I think what we're saying about the developed world is that no, they're nowhere near hyperinflation right now. But bear in mind that hyperinflation is a series of bad decisions that starts when governments go into too much debt and when economies get very indebted. And the longer it takes you to rectify those decisions, the further down the path of bad decisions you go, the harder it is to reverse. And so we're very much on the path of bad decisions right now. And the telltale sign is that they're printing money to pay off their debts. Are they doing it as vociferously and in as large a magnitude as they did in Zimbabwe back in the early 2000s? Not yet. But they're on the path to continuing making those bad decisions.
Well, you have looked at American debt and just how huge it is. So just put that in context, Philip.
Yes, so current debt with both household, corporate and government debt is about 50 trillion. If you add to that social security obligations, it's about 100 trillion. So all combined it will be about $150 trillion. And that number is not coming down. In the last couple of years, it's just accelerated upwards. And the authorities have only said that they, in response to debt crisis, they will continue to print money. So it certainly is a big concern in America.
Do you think Obama even realizes this? Economists have looked at the fact that he can't say, okay, we need to step back, we need to let this economy restructure itself, because that will be painful if you don't have the stimulus. People will lose jobs, wages may fall, they'll have to go back to factories, but that's a good thing, productive work. But very difficult to let that happen.
Well, again, as I said, the longer that you continue to make bad decisions, the harder the harder it is to turn it around. So it's really a case of taking the pain now or later. Now that's not a message everyone loves to hear. They feel that there's got to be some way out of this mess, that we can get off scot-free having racked up decades and decades of debt, and that we can somehow just sidestep the problem and move along. And I think that's sort of part of this muddle along solution that we've seen over the last few years with excessive money printing. So you're quite right. It's not politically expedient to do it. It's always politically easier to print money and to finance your deficits in easy ways rather than hard ways. And of course, that's the big political conundrum that surrounds this whole problem.
I love that the book talks to lay people. It sounds like you've tried to be quite simple in the terminology, because a lot of people, feel left out by that terminology. But what about when your colleagues come and say, no, we need the stimulus, the Keynesian effect, and that's saying that, maybe in the future your way is better, but in the future everyone's dead?
Look, the practical reality is that hyperinflation, money printing, inflation and hyperinflation affects individuals on the ground. In Zimbabwe, stores went empty. It put significant pressure on businesses, and so most local businesses went under. Manufacturing ceased, water ran dry, people couldn't get fuel. Money printing has very real, tangible consequences. And so it's very easy for economists to use big words and to talk about money printing in conceptual ideas. But the practical reality is the long-term consequences of money printing are very negative on our people. And so we've tried to bring this to bear in a book. It's very accessible for ordinary people on the ground. It's economically very tight, so it deals with the issues in an effective way, but it presents it in a way that people can understand.
You, as co-author, when you were writing this, did you feel like this is something important, not just an intellectual exercise? Is this a real warning, something that you are concerned about?
Yes, I am. I mean, I think that we're dealing with, as I say, we're dealing with an extreme case, and sometimes it has a surrealism about it where you sort of think, gosh, it was such a crazy event that happened in Zimbabwe. Yet, it's happened 55 times in the last 100 years. We have a hyperinflation on this planet about once every 2 years. We've got the major economies of the world who've printed about $7 trillion. That's a number most people don't even understand, over the last 5 years. So there's huge risks that are building up in the global financial system. Hyperinflation is not a rare event. And so it's not just, this isn't just some sort of fun intellectual foray. We're really saying, guys, if you don't change your course, if you don't stop making bad decisions and try and catch this thing early and actually pull back from this precipice, then you're just going to head further and further and faster towards it.
Yes, yeah. So Russell mentioned the statistic of 55 hyperinflations in the last 100 years. There's a fairly standard process that happens with these hyperinflations. Is governments going to debt? Everyone's happy while the government's going to debt. It's obviously a great stimulus to the economy. And then a time comes when lenders get concerned whether the government can actually repay that debt, and they withdraw their lending facilities. And it's typically a credit crisis of some sort. There's a crash in the exchange rate. There's pressure on foreign currency. And the government then has a choice to decide whether they will stop spending or whether they'll continue spending with newly printed money.
We're running out of time, so very quickly, do you know a date, a possible date?
Look, hyperinflations are complex events. They have numerous factors that influence these things. In Zimbabwe, it took 11 years from the time that they started printing money on a large scale. But we would be unwise if we started putting dates on the table.
All right. Thank you for joining me,
Thanks,
gentlemen. That was Philip Haslam and Russell Lamberti, authors of When Money Destroys Nations.